This program is part of a series celebrating winners of the 2022 Washington State Book Awards. The Book Awards are a partnership of the Seattle Public Library and the Washington Center for the Book, which is administered by the Washington State Library. Special thanks to the Seattle Public Library Foundation, whose support makes library programs like this possible. I would also like to honor with gratitude the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish tribe, and their stewardship of this land. I encourage all of us to learn more about the Duwamish people, past and present, by visiting duwamishtribe.org. And now about our author. Lynda V is an award-winning writer and reporter. At the Seattle Times, she specializes in coverage of the environment, natural history, and topics related to Native Americans. She is the author of 5 books, including Witness Tree, and her latest title, Orca, Shared Waters, Shared Home.
It's always such a joy to talk about the orcas and share about the Umwelt of the orca, the very special world of these incredible animals. My goal here tonight is to draw you into my own passion for these animals and to share with you the wonder that I feel I've been so lucky to bask in since beginning my reporting on them with what actually started out as a very sad story back in 2018. I want to tell you about why they're so special, the miracle of what and who they are. And yes, I use the word who on purpose, because these are the Kwaltamachtin, the people who live under the sea, in the language of the Lumbee people and the Coast Salish tribes. A wonderful thing that was said to me by Jay Julius, a friend of mine at the Lumbee Nation, when we were talking about orcas once, he said, you know, I think that when our people first arrived, they were here to greet us. I believe they know our songs. Let's let that sit in your heart for a moment. It's just a beautiful idea, an animal that's been here so long. Orcas, you know, they're in every single ocean of the world. There's only one species, only one, but they live in every ocean. And each and every one of them is uniquely adapted to their place. And in that way, they co-evolved with the salmon that are the very, very important food for the southern residents. Before we get into all that, I want to share a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. I brought some very special photographs for you to enjoy, taken by my colleague at the Seattle Times, Steve Ringman, with whom I had the incredible joy of working for some 20 years at the paper before his very recent retirement. I loved working with Steve, and his passion on the orca story was spectacular. You know, a couple of times when we went out on research boats with scientists, here's what would happen. We'd be so excited that, you know, you think you're going to take all these detailed notes and you've got all these plans for all kinds of special setups you're going to do with your camera. But the fact is the charisma of these animals cruising suddenly into your space is so overwhelming. I remember once Steve had a GoPro and he stuck it in the water and he thought he was going to get this awesome underwater footage. And there was a moment when the orcas literally came right underneath our little tiny boat. And I said, Steve, did you get it? Did you get it? And he said, I forgot to turn it on. But I could totally relate, because each one of these experiences was honestly just a heart-pounding moment of excitement of being with such a charismatic animal. You hear their breath. It's like a sound from the beginning of time, that deep, lung-purging breath. So tonight, I'm going to show you some of Steve's incredible photographs. I want to give a big shout out to my colleagues at the Seattle Times. This work wouldn't have happened without them. The Seattle Times is a pretty unique newspaper. It's locally owned, it's family owned, same family for 5 generations right here in Seattle. I like to think of it as craft brewed journalism. We're still at it. I've been there 25 years. I find that a little hard to believe. I'm playing hooky right now. I'm back east at the Harvard Forest on a book leave, putting together a book about old-growth forests and indigenous people and salmon. So hopefully we'll be back here to talk about that in a little while. But, you know, tonight I want you to enjoy Steve's pictures. I want you to talk with me a little bit about what I've learned about the orcas, and then I want to hear your questions. And I really want to hear what's on your mind about the orcas, bring you up to date about where things stand with them. But also, I hope, leave you with a bit of a sense of mission with regard to these neighbors that are the southern resident orcas that frequent Puget Sound. This isn't some distant, remote environmental question. These truly are your neighbors. They still come back right here to the downtown waters of Puget Sound in the winter. Downtown orcas, who else has got that? We need to make sure that miracle is part of life here forever. They've been around for 6 million years. Let them continue to persist. I'm going to end this show with a video that I hope you'll really enjoy. It's totally straight up amateur video that I took on my phone when I was out on a NOAA research boat. It was one of those magic winter days that we can get here when JK and LPOD were all right here. I'm sitting at my desk in the newsroom and I get this call from Brad Hansen at NOAA. Hey, Lynda, we're going to go out and do some monitoring. Do you want to come? And I'm like, no, I'm going to sit at my desk, check my email. So, of course, I went ripping over with Steve to the Don Armini boat ramp, just right in West Seattle, and got on a Zodiac, and out we went. And we spent the whole day out with the orcas. And at the end of the day, it was one of these golden winter days that we get when it's still and the light is apricot. And you can't believe you get to live here. And there's J-Pod and L-Pod and K-Pod right there. And so I get out my iPhone, and I'm like frantically videoing, and I'm going to share that with you at the end. So with that, let's get started. I do want to begin with a moment of appreciation for the life of Ken Balcom. Some of you might have actually worked with him. Probably a lot of you have heard of him. Ken is someone who just recently passed at 82. And he was a salty dog and pain in the ass, irascible, impossible, brilliant person. And his absolute first love was the orcas. And I want to say about Ken, first of all, how much I appreciate everything that he taught me. A lot of the most personal moments that I've had with orca whales came because I was in the boat with Ken, learning about them alongside him. The other thing about Ken that I thought was so important was he was the one who helped us all understand these are individuals. This isn't random black and white wildlife out there. These are a specific population of locally place-based animals that have chosen Puget Sound country, the Salish Sea, and the west coast of our country as their home, and the Strait of Juan de Fuca and the San Juan Islands. This isn't some population that's endlessly circling in and out randomly from the Pacific Ocean. They literally are our neighbors, and they've been co-evolved with the salmon here for thousands of years. And Ken was one of the people who revealed that to us. But even more beautifully, he actually knew the whales as individuals. He began a population survey of the whales back in the 1970s. And what he, with the help of some other scientists, discovered was that you could know them as individuals because of their saddle patch. They all look just a little bit different. And so he began a photographic catalog of the southern residents. And he counted them, and he made us all understand that actually this isn't some circulating population from a wide Pacific Ocean. This is a unique population, and it's very small. It was only about 70 animals when he started. It's only 73 today in 3 specific families, J, K, and L. And he got to know each of these whales and came alongside the mothers right after their births, knew which mothers were pregnant, watched the whales learn how to fish, watched them grow up, saw too many pass before their time. There is only one member of the JK and LPODs that has outlived him, and she is my totem animal. I'm speaking of L25, Ocean Sun. We think she might have been born 90 years ago. That would make her the oldest known living orca. That would also mean she was born before the creation of any of the dams on the Columbia and Snake Rivers, back when Washington State's population was a fraction of today. She is a living environmental archive of the changes of our time in our world. I track her very closely. I saw her just last fall. She's still out there with her family, foraging for fish, taking care of her pod as the matriarch of L-Pod. She's the only one who outlived Ken. So I just wanted to start with those words of appreciation for a very special life and a very special person who left us with a very important legacy of understanding of just what we're seeing when we look out there and we see the southern residents. The best way to think of them is as an ancient society. They have co-evolved together with the salmon here for thousands of years. They have their own specific language, unique to them. They interact only with one another. They interbreed only with one another. This is a problem. They are families that never separate. They stick together for life. And these are matriarchal societies that have abided for centuries and thousands of years. So that's really the right way to think about them. They're not just random black and white wildlife. And Ken was one of the people who swung the door open to that world. Each of them has a personality. They have style. They have sass. And they're unbelievable hunters. So with that. So, Mother Orca Tahlequah. I know a lot of you know this picture. To me, this is one of the finest pictures that Steve Ringman ever shot. And you all remember, I'm sure, in the summer of 2018, how this story started. It started the same way for me that it started for you. And that's the day that we all became aware that Mother Orca Tahlequah had given birth to a calf, a female calf. And it was a source of great joy to us all because the southern residents had not had a calf for many years, at least 3 at that point. And here came this beautiful female calf, but she lived only 1/2 hour. And it was Ken Balcom who put out a press release that reported that this particular whale was starting to do something that we know all very sophisticated, socially connected animals do when they lose a family member. They grieve. Whether it's a giraffe, or it's an elephant, or it's a dolphin, or it's a gorilla, or it's an orca, they grieve. And so what Mother Orca Tahlequah proceeded to do was hold on to that calf. She refused to let it go. She held it either very carefully by her teeth from a pectoral fin, or she balanced this 6-foot-long, 350-pound baby on her head and continued to push it through the water for 17 days and more than 1,000 miles. And at the Seattle Times, we made a decision. We decided we were going to stay with her. We were going to shadow her witness, and we were going to share it with the world. And so that's just what we did. I went out to, I was actually on Lopez Island with my husband at the time, visiting his sister, when we got word of this. And so we got on the intra-island ferry and booked it over to San Juan and went straight to the Center for Whale Research and got on a boat with some of Ken's staff and started to follow her. And Steve shot this picture after spending an entire day out on the water looking and looking and looking for Tahlequah and her calf. This picture, you can tell by the light, is shot at the end of the day, and it's some of the very last daylight of the day. She's in very deep water in Canada. And, you know, to look at her and you see her beautiful form and then you realize there's something that's not quite right. There's something there that's not her. Well, it's her baby. And her blow is shown in the evening light. And Steve got only one frame that day, one usable frame, and it's this one. Being with her at that time is something I'll never forget. There was no one else around. There were no other boats. It was the last light of the day. You could hear how hard she was working to keep pushing this baby, how hard, how labored her breathing was, how altered her dive was by the effort to quickly go down and snatch it before the tide would take it from her. And to be with her in that moment and witness what she was going through, it just made me, as a writer, realize that this was a story we as a newspaper had to stay with. And so we did. We proceeded over the next 18 months to write a series of special sections, 5 of them in all, revealing the life and struggle and wonder of these whales. And that is what turned into this book. Orca Shared Water, Shared Home has many, many beautiful photographs of Steve's, beautiful explanatory graphics by graphic artist Emily Ng, and what I like to call the director's cut, the longer telling. So it's not just a retread of the newspaper stories, it's a bigger, deeper telling of Tahlequah and her family's story. So to tell it tonight, I want to take a step back into the natural history of these incredible animals in this beautiful place. I mean, who gets to live here? Can you believe it? Here's Puget Sound with Mount Baker in the background on just a typical July day. This is Steve's photograph of Spock, one of my very favorite whales, a female. They didn't know she was a female until she had her first calf because she's so big and chunky. Look at her go. You know, these whales are perfectly adapted to this place. They figured out that Chinook salmon was the thing to eat because it's the biggest salmon of all of the salmon, and they're available year-round, and unlike sockeye, unlike chum. And so clearly, Chinook salmon made sense for them when they co-evolved with this species some 12,000 years ago. And really, it's only within the last 50 years that Chinook have gone into this dreadful decline and now are quite scarce, actually range wide, not only in Puget Sound. So this selection of their food, number one, makes total logical sense that Chinook is the thing they key on. But number two, it's also an orca thing. The thing to know about orcas is no matter where they live, in any ocean, anywhere in the world, you are what you eat. They're all the same species. They're all the same at birth, but their mothers teach them what food is. So if you live off the coast of Patagonia, you snatch baby seals off the beach. If you live around Argentina, you take the livers out of great white sharks. If you live up in the Alaska Ocean, you go after seals by causing a wave to rinse a seal off an ice floe. In other words, wherever you are, you have figured out how to use the land and water formations and the local food supply to be what you eat, and you don't eat anything else. Here in the northeastern Pacific, we have 3 types of orcas, again, all the same species, but they've co-evolved different strategies. They're the offshore orcas, rarely seen. They eat mostly sharks, period. There are the so-called transient orcas, again, the very same species, also called the Biggs killer whales. They eat marine mammals, seals, sea lions, baby gray whales, dolphins, you name it, they kill it, and they're incredibly good at it. They'll work as a team if it's a very big animal, surrounding it, corralling it, ramming it, killing it. It's not pretty. They have very long teeth, about like that, solid and dense as marble. They come to a very sharp ripping point, and they interlock like vice grips. You get in that mouth, you're not coming out. The third type of orca in our waters are the resident orcas. There are 2. There's the southern residents, our crew, and there's the northern residents. They do overlap some at about the mouth of the Strait of Juan de Fuca, the southern half of Vancouver Island, up to about the Campbell River in the Strait of Juan de Fuca. That's kind of it. After that, you've got the northern residents up in southeast Alaska and around the Broughton Archipelago. You've got the southern residents who are stuck with us. The most urbanized orca population is the southern residents. They live basically from Vancouver all the way down to the Golden Gate. So they are dealing with the smallest, most beleaguered salmon populations in the Sacramento, in the Columbia, in the Snake, in Puget Sound, in the Fraser. They're dealing with the most pollution, the most racket. If you are a northern resident, you've got the Broughton Archipelago, you've got all that beautiful green, lovely water up there, much quieter, much cleaner, a greater variety of fish, and the first crack at the Washington salmon, which, remember, turn right once they come out the Strait of Juan de Fuca and head north. Mess around out in the sea for 3 or 4 years before they come back south. Well, the northern residents can pick them off. before they get down here. But the problem with the southern residents isn't about that ancient sharing of space. That's as old as the orcas. It's about the depletion of the salmon runs. They go where the fish are. And so what this has meant for the people of Puget Sound, particularly in the San Juan Islands, has been this heartache of the fact that we really don't see them as much as we used to. They used to come up to the San Juan Islands starting around May and hang out really until about September, because they're nailing those fat, juicy, succulent, delectable salmon headed up to the Fraser River. That's why they're in the San Juan Islands. Well, the Fraser runs are in the tank. They've been just terribly, terribly depleted, which means we've been seeing a lot less of the southern residents. Typically, we see them now up there in the islands around August, here and there a little bit, and it's very hit or miss. So much so that some of the scientists who work with these orcas have had to just totally change their whole base of operations. They used to work out of Friday Harbor Labs of the University of Washington all summer long. Anymore, they're trying to pick up what they can pick up out in the Strait of Juan de Fuca and even on the outer coast, because that's where the whales are. They're chasing the fish wherever they can get them. The thing about these animals is they're incredible athletes. They burst swim at 35 miles an hour. They cruise typically 80 miles a day. They stick together as families for life, wholly through, in a dark ocean, the miracle of their ability to communicate by sound. They use something much more sophisticated than just straight up sonar, such as a bat uses to find a mosquito. What they have is this superpower called echolocation, and it is dimensional in what they can vision. They have the ability to send a sound wave out from the melon in their head. This is not coming out of their blowhole, it's coming out of their head. And it can move it and sweep like a flashlight looking for fish. Now remember, salmon don't school. These aren't herring. They have to be chased down one by one, and they have to find them in a dark ocean. And a Chinook salmon is wily prey. They try to escape, they try to hide in holes, they speed up, they slow down, they evade, and the orcas have to twist and dive and accelerate and stop and keep after them using this little tiny click as their guide to whether they still have the salmon before them. What happens is the sound bounces back to them and forms an image in their brain of what they're chasing. They know by the shape of the swim bladder, thank you very much, whether it's what they want. A pink, don't bother. Sockeye, don't care. Chinook, straight up, full on, keep going, keep going. And when they get it, they make this spectacular happy sound, and then they share it. The females share their catch. I find that very beautiful. See, these are families that stick together for life. They're led by the oldest matriarch in the pod. And she's the one who, when times are tough, she's the one who leads the pods to where the fish are. L25, my totem animal, my hero, she still takes the family all the way down to California in the wintertime. Right about now, she's going down to the Sacramento River Delta. Now, why is she doing that? She's going there because she wants the succulent, juicy winter Chinook that exist only in that river. They're unique in the world. And she goes there then because her mother taught her to do that. This is knowledge, ecological knowledge, that's passed on generation to generation. Now, what is sad to me, truly poignant, is she actually getting fish or just the memory of fish? The only thing more rare than an orca at this point is a California winter run Chinook. NOAA has several so-called species in the spotlight. These are the rarest, most endangered animals they protect. There are only 10 of these species in the spotlight. One of them is the southern resident orcas. The other is California winter run Chinook. The Sacramento used to be second only to the Columbia in its production capacity of salmon. But today, you know, most people don't even think of California as a salmon state. Let that never be said about Washington. I think, though, that the thing that is on their side is their incredible dynamism, their amazing intelligence, and their super abilities to do what they uniquely know how to do. If these animals have what they need, they can take care of the rest. What they need is fish. They need water quiet enough that they can hear that tiny sound of echolocation bouncing back from the fish. And they need fish that's clean, not full of pollutants. If they can have that, they can do anything, and they've been doing it for 6 million years. So what does that mean for us? It means that some of their habitat needs to look a lot more like it used to. This picture was taken by Steve up in BC. We thought, you know, if we're going to write about the orcas, the southern residents, we need to understand why things are so different with the northern residents, which are increasing in numbers year by year. What's so different? Why are they doing better? It's the same animal, just in a different place. Well, here's part of what's different. I mean, when you're up in BC, there's been a lot of logging, even a tragic amount of logging that's still occurring. But there's still a lot of forest up there, a lot of places that look a lot more like Puget Sound used to. These are the salmon forests. These are the forests that protect and cool and hold the habitats that are the homes of these salmon when they're rearing in fresh water. It's so important to understand this connection between the uplands, the freshwater, the estuary, and the saltwater. It's all connected by the bright silvery lives of these salmon that stitch it all together. If you have forests, they hold the banks in place. The forests cool the water. The forests rain down a nutritious feast of insects for baby salmon to eat. If you don't have forests, you don't have fish. We need these salmon forests. These are the mature and old-growth forests that once cloaked the landscape throughout Puget Sound country, throughout the Salish Sea. We still have a lot of these forests left, and they need to be protected. And the ones that are the old growth of tomorrow must be left standing. That's job one. Keep track, I have more. I told you about the teeth. These teeth actually belong to Namu, the killer whale. He was the first captive orca ever in Puget Sound, ever in the world. He was collected, that's the right word, up by a collector who's still with us in Washington State, named Tim Griffin, who had an aquarium attraction show down on, believe it or not, right here in Seattle on Elliott Bay. And he went up and he got Namu, who was caught in a fisherman's net, and he brought him back, and he was the toast of Seattle. They gave him the key to the city. There are actually a lot of people who probably remember Namu. He performed down there in Elliott Bay for about a year before he died of the pollution in Puget Sound, because back then we didn't actually treat our sewage. So why do I tell you that story? It's because of this. This is a photograph that Steve took of a totem that was carved in honor of Tahlequah. She's the last southern resident orca still in captivity from the so-called capture era, which went on throughout the 1970s, finally ending in 1976. Tahlequah lives in Miami in a tank, and she has been in captivity for more than 50 years. This totem pole was created by the Lummi Nation to take down to Miami, to the Seaquarium, where she's still held, to petition for her release. And I want you to notice all the hands of all the people who are laying prayers on that totem pole before it's taken down to Miami to offer blessings and prayers for Tokatai's release. She's still in captivity. She makes L-pod calls. We think she might be L25's daughter. We don't know that for sure. I think it's really important to realize how much our understanding of the orcas has changed in just the lifetime of Tokatai and L25, and for that matter, Ken Malcolm. People used to think that orcas were vicious killers, actually just something to shoot at or even get rid of if you could, partly because they ate fish and they competed with fishermen. But over the course of just our lifetime, when it was once legal in Washington State for anybody to go out and capture a killer whale and put it in captivity for profit and amusement, that was ended forever in Washington State. by 3 public officials who just said no. And 2 of them, Dan Evans and Ralph Monroe, are still with us today. And it's been illegal to capture or harass or harm an orca whale in Washington waters since 1976. So we have taken steps before as a state and as a country to protect whales in our waters, and it works. It makes an enormous difference. There are actually more whales in Washington waters today of different species than in any of our parents' lifetimes or our lifetimes. More humpbacks, more gray whales, more transient or big killer whales. It's really only the southern residents that are doing badly. Why are there more whales? Because of the passage of the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which outlawed killing them. It worked. There's also been an enormous investment into cleaning up the waters of Puget Sound with sewage treatment. That has also created cleaner water and better habitat and more food and more fish for these whales in generations, and the numbers are astounding. So the southern residents remain the outlier, and that is because their specialization in eating Chinook. So that's job 2 for you. We talked about the forests. Now we're going to talk about the fish. So this is probably one of my very best days of work. It's the day I told you about when the southern residents swang into town. And I want to focus now on Puget Sound, where we live, and talk about some of the work that needs to be done by all of us if we want these whales to be with us. So this is actually the Green River. You know, the Green River is our only river. It flows into the Duwamish. And in its upper reaches, it looks like this. It's spectacular salmon habitat. But there's a dam right in the middle of the Green River for flood control. It's called the Howard Hansen Dam. It has no fish passage, and it's been blocking all of this habitat for many, many years. This is a herring. It's a miraculous animal that I'm holding in my hand from a research cruise out on the Pacific Ocean with NOAA a couple summers ago. Herring and other forage fish are the crucial thing that feeds salmon. These forage fish feed the big fish, which feed the blackfish. If you want to know anything about orcas, that's really all you need to know. If you don't have natural beaches that provide the places where these forage fish spawn, you're not going to have herring, and then you're not going to have salmon, and you're not going to have orcas. So this is all about habitat. All those bulkheads and docks and things that have hardened the shoreline so you don't have the natural sandy beach that is the home for the forage fish for laying their eggs for the next generation, the eelgrass and all of that subaquatic vegetation. These soft, natural, sandy beaches are where it all starts. So herring. Unfortunately, this is what a lot of our urban area looks like. This is the green connects to the Duwamish, and then the Duwamish flows into Elliott Bay. And here is what the Green River looks like when it's encased in levee walls to protect what has become the largest warehousing district outside California on the West Coast. If you're a salmon, what does this look like to you? It's a baking hot asphalt hiker-biker trail in a little bit of rock wall and a levee in the water. And you can imagine how warm that water gets. There's no shade, there's no insects, there are no hidey holes. There are none of the things that salmon need to survive. But at least it's not this. This is a picture of San Francisco as Steve and I were landing to go work in California, to go take a look at the Sacramento River and learn about the California winter run Chinook and the habitat that they're facing down there in California. Obviously, this is a whole other scale of population and development and habitat loss than we've faced in Washington State. And I'll never forget, you know, being out on the river with Steve. It was about 101 degrees that day, and we were out with a biologist collecting spawned out carcasses from winter run Chinook. And at the end of that sad, long day, we went out to a restaurant and we ate, I don't know, a salad and drank probably a gallon of water. And the waitress came over and she took the credit card and she said, "Oh, Seattle Times, what are you doing down here?" I said, "Oh, well, we're here to, you know, write about orcas and salmon." And she said, well, orcas and salmon, I don't get cable, so I don't know about that. And I thought, that is incredibly sad. You know, they live right here, they come right here, and people have become so disconnected from the salmon and from the orcas in California, they're virtually been forgotten. Well, that's not true here. Still here, we hold these animals and our identity is connected to them. And as long as we hold on to that, I think we have a fighting chance for our neighbors, our non-human neighbors, who are just as much a part of our community as we are. I take great hope in this picture. This is a spectacular picture of the calf that J35 had after she lost that calf. And can you see what's in that baby's mouth? It is a salmon. So the calf is still so young in that picture that the calf is still nursing on that wonderfully rich mother's milk. But it's kind of, maybe I like to think, learning how to grow up and be an orca someday. I want to leave you with this treat. I told you about that day when I was out on the boat with Brad Hansen and Steve, and you know, this is just an amateur video. It's nothing special, but what is so special is that it's nothing special. They were here just like they so often are in the winter, and the fact that they're here and that we have the opportunity to hang out with the southern residents right at the foot of skyscrapers in downtown Seattle for a couple hours. You know, it's so beautiful when they swing into town because everybody gets excited, right? And people go out to Golden Gardens, and they go out to Carkeek Park, and they go out to the tip of Vashon Island, and they go out just to go see them and hear them. And there it goes, I think. Yeah, there they go. So picture that, right? Here we live in this beautiful city with a library like this and all these urban amenities, but there's also these guys, JK and L. And what was so fun about this day with them was they looked so good. It was the first day that they had all been together in Puget Sound, and they were really playful. They were just hacking around, you know, jumping and spy hopping and rolling around on their back and swimming upside down just for fun. It was towards the end of the day, and they were headed right downtown. Love it.
Heard that. Heard that.
There it is, that golden winter light that we get. Isn't that great? Just messing around. They like to hear the sound. You know, why do they do it? Because it's fun. Wouldn't you if you could? Looking around, spy hopping. They have excellent vision, by the way. They recognize you by sight. I'm sure they knew the sound of Ken's boat. Love that. They're so big. I love the sound of their breath. So beautiful. See how they're always so close together? They're always together and touching. They touch so much. Just playing dead, hanging out, upside down for the heck of it.
Play dead?
Why not?
Oh, blowing bubbles.
He was blowing bubbles upside down. Poof.
Oh, way out there. What would he call it?
I call it
Sea snake. The red thing.
I don't know what's everybody's favorite. Absolutely.
Did they get that gun yet?
So there you go. I'll take your questions. Thank you. So the question was, do the orcas recognize the individual scientists? Do they know who they are, and do they let them get closer? I want to say a couple things about that. Ken Balcom, who I mentioned earlier, had by far the longest time on the water with these animals, some 40 years. And one of the charming things about Ken was, you know, in a world where a lot of things have gotten big and fancy and expensive, I think he wore the same flannel shirt every time I saw him over the course of many, many years. And he had a yuckety old, raggedy old Boston whaler that he would go out on, and he wore ski goggles for spray protection because it was always, you know, throwing up a lot of spray. So he was quite a sight on the water, and the name of his boat was the Chimo. He named it for one of the first captive killer whales. And so, you know, he would go racing out to Snug Harbor on the west side of San Juan Island, where he lived and worked. He'd get in that thing, and he'd fire it up, and he'd head out to wherever he'd heard there was a sighting. And, you know, I spent a lot of time with Ken on that boat, and the whales were not the slightest bit scared of him or disturbed by his boat. They would come alongside. I really think they were kind of saying hello. He was convinced they knew the sound of his engine, and why wouldn't they? I mean, an animal that smart, that's totally sound-oriented, with a single human being who had been literally visiting them and photographing them for 40 years. I don't have any doubt they knew him. I'm quite sure they did. And Ken felt sure they knew the sound of his boat. I think one of the funny questions that somebody once asked me is, well, you know, are they afraid? And I'm like, you don't get it, do you? This is an animal that's not afraid of anything. Orca are one of the few animals in the world that nothing else eats. Nothing eats an orca. They're the absolute top predator in the ocean. So heck no, they're not afraid of anything. And they're so incredibly smart, and they have such excellent eyesight that when they were desperate, the scientists were desperately trying to figure out what to do the summer of 2018. Not only was Tahlequah pushing around her dead calf, but there was a very terribly emaciated young whale that was also dying in front of everyone. And this poor little whale named J50 was fading away, even as Tahlequah was, you know, pushing this calf around. And so poor NOAA, they're trying to figure out what in the world to do, and can they maybe feed J50? Can they medicate fish and feed her a medicated fish? Well, how do you do that with an orca so you don't habituate it to being, you know, pitched a fish off the back of a boat? So they got into this elaborate deal of getting some hatchery fish and putting a tube under the surface of the water and dropping this hatchery fish into the tube so the orca wouldn't associate it with, you know, a human throwing a fish, all because they know just how smart they are. It's like it's better than your dog. You know how the one time you use that can opener on the dog food can, that's the sound they'll hear even if they won't come when you call, right? It's way worse with an orca. They're so smart. And what was so interesting was when they tried feeding J50 in this way, remember I told you it's a hatchery fish. Well, this means it's already turned color because it's been in fresh water. This doesn't look like any salmon they've ever seen. It's not a sea bright silver salmon. She wouldn't go anywhere near it. She's like, I don't want that ratty old thing. So that didn't work. You know, but the answer to your question, do they know the scientists individually? I don't have any doubt that the ones that are with them a lot. Deborah Giles would be another one of those people. She goes out in a boat with a dog, actually, to try to sniff out the whale's scat, because there's an incredible amount of biological information in the scat as to stress levels, as to, you know, she can actually tell after the DNA and the scat has been analyzed, not only which species of salmon, was it a Chinook, was it a chum, what river it came from. This has been very important information for NOAA as they try to work on habitat improvement, which are the most important rivers. Where are most of the salmon coming from? So somebody like Deborah Giles, who's been out there scooping up their poop for many years, I think they probably know her too. Yeah, I bet they do. So the question was, isn't it the case that the Native American people of the Salish Sea have never hunted the orca because they felt a kinship and a respect for them? And is that the only animal that we know that to be true of? And, it is very true, and this is pan-Indian. This goes up into Alaska, this goes up into BC, this is true throughout the Salish Sea. These animals are regarded as family, literally family. It's not it's not like a metaphor. It's regarded as they are the people who live under the sea. And up in BC, it goes further to believe that they are their chiefs incarnate. And so, these animals are revered. They have, as they like to say up in BC, an ancient understanding, a pact. They don't hurt people. They're nonviolent. Even when their babies were being taken away during the capture era, they never attacked a human. It's only happened once or twice at SeaWorld under deranged circumstances where the animals are being kept in a situation utterly unlike anything in the wild. And so they regard it as an ancient pact. They don't hurt the orcas, and the orcas don't hurt them. And in fact, they're revered and regarded as family. To the second part of your question, are there any other animals like that are just a kind of hands-off regard, that we don't touch them, we don't hurt them, we don't use them, we don't eat them, I don't think I've ever heard of another animal that's held in that kind of esteem. Certainly places, certainly geographical features, sacred places where you don't go, plenty of that. But in terms of another animal that's regarded as a family member that you wouldn't hunt, I can't think of any. Yeah. They are a top predator. They really are at the top of the Salish Sea animal kingdom, and that, I think, holds a very special place. Right. So the question is, how well are we balancing our desire to go out and see them, as indeed I did, with their need to be left alone? I'll say a couple things about that. The scientists who work with the whales, who get close to them, as Ken did, as Deborah does, although less than others, she and others have special permits from NOAA to do their work. And the way that we got the pictures we got was by getting permission to be with them in their boats. They literally had to write us onto their permits. I could never get in a boat and go do that as a journalist. You can only do that under a federal permit, under the permission of a scientist, with a whole elaborate protocol of explanation of what and why and for who and so forth. One of the biggest challenges of covering this story was dealing with the access. Number one, getting it. But even then, would the whales even be around? I mean, now that their presence is so diminished in these near shore waters where you can actually work, as opposed to out in the open sea, sure, you could get them permission, sure, you can be in the boat. Would you actually finally see them? I mean, when we went up north into BC, one of the biggest changes was they were everywhere. I mean, suddenly this whole big tension of would we see them, would the work be wasted? They were everywhere. We saw them when we weren't even trying to see them because they were just that much more plentiful. And it was a reset. It made you realize you'd forgotten what normal looks like. Coming back to the heart of your question, which is about whale watching, and also just Joe's six-pack, people out in their boat, I think we have a long way to go with that, honestly. I mean, the legislature has made changes, and they're important changes in terms of bigger distance kept between the boats and the whales. Honestly, it's so far away now, I can't imagine it's a very meaningful opportunity for seeing the southern residents, is what we're talking about specifically. You're allowed to be much closer to other species. And if there is a vulnerability, a particular vulnerability, an animal is thin, an animal's pregnant, an animal has a baby less than a year old, they're not allowed to be near those whales at all. The legislature also, for the first time, limited how long any one boat could watch a whale. So there have been changes, but there are plenty of people, including scientists, who believe that really the southern residents at this point are under so much stress. Just, watch other things. You can watch the transients all day long. You can watch the humpbacks, you can watch the gray whales. Just leave them alone. So there have been big changes, and they were the first changes made in our state. There are plenty of people who think there ought to be more, and that there's plenty of opportunity to see whales without having to, insist that it be the southern residents. Their big problem, though, honestly, it's the uneducated just running around out there boater. And with COVID, unfortunately, a lot of people who are stir crazy to get outside suddenly got a boat. And I know from friends who live in the San Juans who are used to nice, quiet coves that were suddenly just inundated with people who had no idea what they were doing, brand new boaters. So this is an education and a responsibility thing, just as it is with most things. But then there's the whole shipping industry. I mean, it's the commercial shipping vessels with cavitating propellers that make the most serious, invasive, persistent noise during the time that orcas are feeding in the San Juan Island and Strait of Juan de Fuca waters. And there's some voluntary programs now, both through the Port of Vancouver and the Port of Seattle, under which actually a surprising number of shippers have voluntarily cut their speed in half when whales are present in order to greatly decrease the sound. Anything going slower is not as loud as something going faster. So these voluntary programs also show that you can make a difference. Ultimately, it's about the usual things, time and money. Shippers want to go faster just so they can move more freight more quickly. Shippers don't want to replace old cavitating, rackety propellers because that's expensive. But better equipment and regulations could make a difference in how much noise these whales have to endure. You can think about it as feeding time. Anything that decreases their opportunity is not what they need. When fish are scarce, every opportunity counts. And if you decrease that opportunity by making too much noise for them to hear that crucial series of little sounds they've got to hear, that's the same as taking that fish right out of their mouth. When there's plenty of fish, it doesn't matter. I mean, that's something Ken used to talk about. He was obsessed about this because he felt like, he lived through the 70s when there were much more fish. You had seal bombs going off as fishermen were trying to chase seals off their nets, and the bay was full of lights, and there were lots of orcas. What he kept coming back to is it's the fish. Because after all, the big killer whales are in the same water. They're enduring the same noise levels. They're dealing with even higher levels of pollution in their food because they're eating higher on the food chain. But yet they're fat and happy and multiplying like mad because they have plenty of marine mammals to eat. So he would always come back to the fish, that it's about habitat and salmon. Not that noise doesn't matter, especially when fish are scarce. In the back. So the question was, looking at the incredible population pressure in California, and we all know that more and more people are moving here to Washington State, and that's only going to increase because we're going to be the last nice place to live. All these climate refugees are going to come here. We're going to have the last fresh water, the last beautiful fresh food, the last big trees, the last fish, the last moderate climate. Your question is, what, if anything, is being done to protect the beaches so that we have forage fish to feed the salmon? I actually have good news about this. I do. There is, I'll use a polite word, a lot of work being done in Puget Sound and around Washington State on removing bulkheads and in ripping out old docks and in taking down deadbeat dams. And this work is spectacular and it's effective. And it's being done in partnerships between tribes and local governments and the state. I can give you lots of examples, and the Corps of Engineers has also been getting involved and taken out some of their hardscapes. They're going to start providing fish passage finally at the Howard Hansen Dam. There's a lot going on, but what I want to leave you with is a burning sense of urgency to do even more. This is a wealthy area, and Washington, in my view, I'm not from here so I can say this, they get in their own way. I mean, we don't even have an income tax. And so a lot of the wealth that's here is not being leveraged into the public benefit that we need, that wildlife needs, that conservation needs, that schools need, that public health needs. We can do better, Washington. We've done some remarkable things. We are the dam busting state. We've taken down more dams and bigger dams than anybody. And we're taking down small dams all over the place. The city of Bellingham took down a dam on the Nooksack River in partnership with the local tribes and with American Rivers. It was just an old water diversion they didn't even want anymore. There's so much of that kind of stuff out there. Nobody even uses it anymore. It's just sitting there. It takes money. It takes focus. It takes delivery. And we can get it done. We just need to do so much more of it. And this is where it's really important to be involved with your local government. King County, your council members need to know that in your flood district, you don't want any more walls on the Green and the Duwamish River. You want them set back so that you can have some better habitat for salmon to feed the orcas. You want your legislators to know that you insist on clean water and you insist on habitat protection, and you insist on money for these expensive fixes to the habitat that we wrecked over the last 100 years. It can be done. We have an amazing cadre of scientists and engineers here and know how. Add money and stir. Here's the best part. It works. Every place, every time that we've done this, the fish have come back. And it feeds everything, not just the orcas. It feeds the birds. It feeds all of the beautiful biodiversity of this place that we love and we caretake. Yes. So the question is there any indication that the southern residents are beginning to adapt their diet to switch to something else? No. Damn it, no. They are who they are and they eat what they eat, and that's what it means to be an orca. And you know, for the southern residents, it's been Chinook for, I don't know, 12,000 years. And one thing I'm really curious about, what will happen when L25 passes, right? Because she's the norm enforcer at this point, and she's been around since before all this stuff started to go south. So to her, you still go to California, you still forage for winter Chinook, damn it, whether they're there or not. I'm going to be really curious to see what happens when she passes. There is a 40-year gap to the next southern resident. So we're really talking about a major societal shift at that point for those pods. Will somebody take a risk? Will somebody take a bite out of a nice juicy seal? I just don't know. But it hasn't happened yet. And, you know, I just don't know that it ever will. It's hard to believe. In nature, you figure if you're hungry, you're going to eat, right? You might not like it, but you'll eat your broccoli. But, you know, it's just deeply cultural. You wouldn't eat your cat, and they're not going to eat a seal. They can kill them. We see them out there packing them around under their peck and playing with them, but they won't eat them, even though they're all around them. So interesting. And they're really stubborn about salmon, too. They'll knock a pink out of the way. Won't even touch it. No, Chinook. They'll eat chum. That's the second largest salmon, and they eat those in the fall and the winter. We also know from analysis of stomach and DNA in their scat that they will eat some lingcod. They'll eat some other things, but mostly it's all Chinook all the time, because it used to make sense. Mm-hmm. Right, so the question is, what is the distance through which they can communicate through the water? It's miles. You know, they're in a dark ocean, and sometimes they are separated by a good distance because usually it's the matriarch who's all the way out in front looking for the fish. She's the scout. She can be heard for miles by her pod, but that's a different sound. These are the calls that they make to one another. You've heard these calls. They're quite spectacular. They make them through their blowhole. The sound that counts, if you're talking about eating, it's a tiny little click. Faster. It's a small sound. And it's easily overwhelmed, and it's in the same frequency as these big ships. It's not just the volume, it's the frequency. Yeah.